Commander Zephyx of the Galactic Council Survey Fleet stared at the long-range sensors with all four of his compound eyes. Something massive was drifting through the empty space between star systems, far from any known trade routes or inhabited worlds. The object appeared to be artificial, but its design was unlike anything in the Council's extensive databases. "Increase magnification," Zephyx ordered his bridge crew aboard the exploration vessel Stellar Wisdom. The main viewing screen flickered and resolved into a clearer image of the mysterious object. What they saw made several crew members burst into laughter. The thing looked like an enormous metal brick floating through space. It was gray, angular, and completely lacking in the elegant curves and bioorganic designs that marked proper starship construction. Crude rectangular sections jutted out at random angles, connected by what appeared to be simple welded joints. The entire structure looked like it had been assembled by children playing with building blocks. "By the 7 moons of Cathari," wheezed Engineer Trylock, his breathing slits fluttering with amusement. "What primitive species built that monstrosity? It looks like they took scrap metal and just stuck it together with hope and prayer." Navigator Essex, a tall crystalline being from the inner systems, chimed in with crystalline laughter that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Look at those propulsion units. They're actual chemical rockets. I haven't seen anything so backward since we discovered the ruins on Proxima 7. Whoever built this thing must have barely mastered fire." Science Officer Kalen, whose tentacles were dancing with scientific curiosity, ran a preliminary scan of the vessel. "The construction materials are interesting, though. Basic iron and steel alloys, some aluminum composites. Very simple, very crude, but surprisingly durable for such primitive metallurgy." Commander Zephyx studied the readouts flowing across his command console. The ship was indeed massive, almost 2 kilometers in length, but it showed no signs of life or active systems. It appeared to be nothing more than a derelict hulk drifting through the void. Still, protocol required investigation of any unknown vessels, especially ones this size. "Begin approach procedures," he commanded, "but maintain safe distance. Even primitive vessels can be dangerous if they're carrying unstable fuel or weapons." As the Stellar Wisdom moved closer, more details became visible. The alien ship's hull was scarred and pitted, clearly having endured centuries or perhaps millennia of micrometeorite impacts and radiation exposure. Strange symbols and markings covered various sections of the hull, but they were too weathered to make out clearly. "Commander," called communications specialist Vorthon, "I'm detecting some very faint energy signatures from the vessel. It appears to have some kind of backup power system still functioning, though at minimal levels." The closer they got, the more primitive the ship appeared. The hull plating was held together with actual rivets and welding seams, techniques so archaic that most Council species had abandoned them before they even achieved spaceflight. The sensor arrays looked like crude metal dishes and rods, completely unlike the sophisticated quantum sensors used by modern vessels. "I'm reading what might be weapon systems," reported Tactical Officer Nereth, his scaled hide rippling with disdain. "They appear to be kinetic projectile launchers. Can you imagine? They literally plan to throw pieces of metal at their enemies. How wonderfully primitive." This drew fresh laughter from the bridge crew. Kinetic weapons had been obsolete for thousands of years, ever since the development of plasma and energy-based armaments. The idea of hurling chunks of metal through space seemed almost quaint. "The engines are even more amusing," added Trylock, studying the propulsion systems. "Chemical combustion drives, possibly nuclear thermal rockets. The fuel requirements must have been enormous. They probably needed to carry more fuel than cargo just to move this thing anywhere." Commander Zephyx was beginning to feel almost sorry for whatever species had built this vessel. It was clear they had tried their best with the limited technology available to them, but the result was a ship that wouldn't last 5 minutes in combat against even the most basic Council patrol vessel. "Sir," interrupted sensor specialist Korth. I'm detecting something unusual. The ship appears to have artificial gravity systems, but they're not using gravitic generators. The readings suggest they achieved it through rotation. The entire ship spins to create centrifugal force. This revelation brought even more laughter. Spinning ships to create artificial gravity was a technique so primitive it was usually mentioned only in history classes about the earliest days of spaceflight. "How delightfully backward," commented Essex. "Imagine the engineering nightmares of building a rotating ship that size. The stress on the hull structure must be enormous. It's amazing the thing hasn't torn itself apart." As they conducted their initial survey, the crew of the Stellar Wisdom continued to discover new examples of the primitive technology. The communication arrays were simple radio transmitters and receivers. The life support systems appeared to rely on mechanical air recycling rather than bioatmospheric processors. Even the lighting systems seemed to use basic electrical illumination instead of bioluminescent panels. "I'm detecting what might be crew quarters," reported Kalen, his tentacles working over the science console. "The spaces are ridiculously large by our standards. These beings must have been quite inefficient in their use of space. Modern Council ships could house 10 times as many crew members in the same volume." The general consensus on the bridge was that they had discovered the derelict vessel of some long-extinct species that had achieved spaceflight briefly before dying out, probably due to their technological limitations. It was not uncommon to find such relics drifting through space, remnants of civilizations that had reached for the stars but lacked the knowledge or wisdom to succeed. "Well," said Commander Zephyx finally, "we should board and investigate. Even primitive technology can sometimes offer insights into different approaches to engineering problems, and we need to identify which species built this thing for our historical records." "Should we call for an archaeological team?" asked Kalen. "This seems like it might be of interest to the Council's Xenoarchaeology Department." Zephyx considered this. "Not yet. Let's do a preliminary investigation first. If we find anything particularly interesting, we can always request specialist support later." The boarding party was assembled quickly. Commander Zephyx would lead the team personally, accompanied by Science Officer Kalen, Engineer Trilok, and 2 security officers. They would take a shuttle over to the derelict and attempt to find an airlock or create an entry point. As they prepared for departure, the crew continued to marvel at the primitive vessel. It had become something of a source of entertainment, with various crew members pointing out new examples of backward technology and making jokes about the poor species that had built it. "I wonder if they even had faster-than-light travel," mused Navigator Essex. "This thing looks like it was designed for purely sublight journeys. They might have spent generations traveling between stars. If they could even reach other stars," added Tactical Officer Nareth. "Those engines look barely capable of escaping a planetary gravity well, let alone achieving interstellar velocities." The shuttle bay was filled with chatter and laughter as the boarding party suited up for their investigation. Everyone was curious to see what other primitive technologies they might discover inside the ancient derelict. "Remember," Commander Zephyx told his team as they climbed into the shuttle, "we're dealing with an unknown species and unknown technology. Even if it appears primitive, we should take appropriate precautions. Some of the most dangerous artifacts in Council space have come from technologically backward civilizations." But privately, even Zephyx found it hard to imagine this particular derelict posing any real threat. It looked more like a museum piece than a ship that had ever been capable of serious space travel. The shuttle separated from the Stellar Wisdom and approached the ancient vessel. Up close, the primitive construction was even more apparent. The hull plates were of varying sizes and thicknesses, clearly manufactured using different processes and probably at different times. The whole ship looked like it had been built over many years, perhaps decades, with components added as they became available. Look at those docking ports, observed Trylock as they searched for a way inside. They're mechanical compression seals, not energy barriers. And they're huge. The engineering tolerance requirements must have been nightmare to maintain. They found what appeared to be a maintenance airlock on the ship's side. The controls were simple mechanical switches and dials, labeled with symbols that looked almost like mathematical notation rather than proper writing. "I think I can figure out the operating mechanism," said Kalen, studying the airlock controls with several of his tentacles. "It's purely mechanical, probably pneumatic. Very simple, very robust, but incredibly crude by our standards." The airlock cycled slowly, taking several minutes to complete its operation. When the inner door finally opened, the boarding party found themselves in a chamber that was both familiar and alien. It was clearly designed for bipedal beings roughly similar in size to humans, but the technology was unlike anything they had seen before. The corridor beyond the airlock was lit by harsh white lights that cast sharp shadows everywhere. The walls were covered with pipes, cables, and mechanical systems, all exposed rather than hidden behind elegant panels. Everything looked functional, but utterly without aesthetic consideration. "It's like they built this ship inside out," whispered Trylock. "All the infrastructure is visible. Don't they believe in covering their equipment?" As they moved deeper into the ship, they continued to find evidence of the builder's primitive but determined approach to space travel. Emergency equipment was stored in simple mechanical lockers. Information displays were basic flat screens showing text and simple graphics. Even the gravity felt different, less smooth and consistent than the artificial gravity systems they were used to. But despite its primitive nature, the ship felt solid, well-built, and surprisingly spacious. Whatever species had constructed it had clearly put enormous effort into making it functional and durable, even if they lacked the sophisticated technology available to council civilizations. The boarding party had no idea that their discovery would soon challenge everything they thought they knew about technological development in the galaxy. The bridge of the derelict ship was unlike anything the council team had ever seen. Instead of the smooth, organic curves and integrated systems they were accustomed to, they found themselves in a chamber filled with individual control stations, each one clearly designed for specific functions. Dozens of screens, switches, buttons, and mechanical controls covered every surface. "By the spiral nebula," breathed Kalen, his tentacles recoiling slightly. "How did they even operate this thing? There must be thousands of individual controls here." Commander Zephix studied the captain's chair, which was positioned in the center of the bridge with a commanding view of all the stations. It was a simple mechanical seat with basic padding, nothing like the bio-responsive command interfaces used in modern ships. Yet something about its design suggested careful thought and practical experience. "Commander," called Trylock from one of the side stations, "I'm finding something very strange here. These computer systems are using binary processing, but the complexity levels are far higher than anything we've seen from primitive civilizations. Look at this." He had managed to activate one of the dormant terminals, using the ship's backup power. The screen flickered to life, displaying streams of data in symbols that none of them could read. But the sheer volume and complexity of the information was startling. "That's not possible," said Kalen, moving closer to examine the display. "Binary processing is incredibly inefficient. To achieve this level of data complexity using such primitive computational methods would require massive amounts of processing power. The energy requirements alone should have been prohibitive." Science Officer Kalen began connecting his portable analysis equipment to the ship's systems, trying to extract more information. What he found made his tentacles writhe with confusion. "Commander, I'm reading construction dates from these systems. But this can't be right. According to these timestamps, this ship was built over 1,000 years ago." A silence fell over the boarding party. 1,000 years ago, the Galactic Council had been in its infancy. Most member species had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel. The idea that some unknown civilization had been building massive starships at that time was deeply unsettling. "Check your readings," ordered Commander Zephyx. "There must be an error in the translation protocols." Kalen worked frantically over his instruments, running the data through multiple analysis systems. But every test confirmed the same impossible result. "Sir, I've triple-checked everything. These construction dates are consistent across multiple ship systems. This vessel was definitely built approximately 1,000 years ago. But that's not the most disturbing part." He paused, his tentacles trembling slightly. "According to the navigational logs I'm accessing, this ship didn't just travel between nearby star systems. It came from a region of space that's over 50,000 light-years away. The journey to reach this location would have taken centuries, even with faster-than-light drive technology." Engineer Trylock was examining the ship's power systems and making his own disturbing discoveries. "Commander, I need to revise my earlier assessment of their propulsion technology. Yes, they're using chemical and nuclear thermal rockets, but they're not the primary drive system. There's something else here, something I don't understand." He led them to a section of the ship that housed the main engines. What they found there challenged everything they thought they knew about the vessel. Hidden beneath layers of additional equipment and modifications was a drive system unlike anything in Council databases. It wasn't using gravitational manipulation like modern faster-than-light drives, nor did it rely on the quantum tunnel effects used by most advanced civilizations. Instead, it seemed to be based on principles that the Council's science had dismissed as theoretically impossible. "This drive system appears to manipulate space-time directly," whispered Trylock, his breathing slits fluttering with nervous excitement. "But the mathematical requirements for such technology are beyond even our current understanding. How could a primitive civilization have developed something like this?" They found the ship's library databases and began downloading what information they could access. The language was completely unknown, but the Council's universal translation systems began working on pattern recognition and mathematical correlations. As the first translations came through, the boarding party felt their understanding of galactic history beginning to crumble. The ship's name translated roughly to "Enduring Hope," and it was identified as a deep space exploration vessel belonging to something called the Terran Colonial Fleet. According to the logs, it had been launched from a world called Earth as part of a massive expansion program designed to establish human colonies throughout the galaxy. "Humans?" said Commander Zephyx, struggling to process this information. "I've never heard of any species called humans. And this ship is supposed to be from Earth? There's no planet by that name in any of our star charts." But Kalen was uncovering even more disturbing information from the ship's databases. "Commander, according to these records, the humans launched not just this ship, but hundreds of similar vessels. This was part of something called the Millennium Project, a coordinated effort to spread their civilization across the entire galaxy. The more they learned, the more impossible it seemed. The records spoke of massive industrial capabilities, enormous populations, and technological achievements that seemed far beyond what should have been possible for any civilization 1,000 years ago. "Look at these population figures," said Trylock, studying demographic data from the ship's files. "They're claiming their homeworld had over 12 billion inhabitants, with colonies on hundreds of other worlds. That's larger than most current Council civilizations." But the most shocking discovery came when Kalen managed to access the ship's historical archives. Hidden deep in the database were records of contact with other alien civilizations, including detailed descriptions of several species that the boarding party recognized immediately. "Commander," Kalen said, his voice barely above a whisper, "these records describe contact with the Althari Empire, the Zelthian Trade Federation, and the Korthax Military Republic. They have detailed information about all of these civilizations, including technology assessments and diplomatic correspondence. This was impossible. The Althari Empire had dominated that region of space 800 years ago before mysteriously disappearing. The Zelthian Trade Federation had been a major galactic power for centuries before suddenly withdrawing from interstellar commerce. The Korthax Military Republic had been one of the most feared civilizations in the galaxy before they inexplicably abandoned their military expansion and became isolationist. According to these records, continued Kalen, the humans were in active communication with all of these civilizations. In fact, it appears that the humans were considered equals or even superiors in several technological areas. The implications were staggering. If these records were accurate, then humans had been a major galactic civilization 1,000 years ago, with technology and capabilities that rivaled or exceeded anything the Council possessed today. But if that was true, where were they now? Why was there no trace of this vast human civilization in current galactic affairs? Commander Zefix ordered his team to search for more recent records. Anything that might explain what had happened to the humans after this ship had been launched. What they found in the ship's final log entries was both fascinating and terrifying. The last entries described something called the Great Regression, a deliberate decision by human civilization to abandon their advanced technology and withdraw from galactic affairs. According to the logs, humans had discovered something during their expansion that convinced them that rapid technological advancement was dangerous, not just to themselves, but to all intelligent life in the galaxy. They chose to go backward, read Kalen from the translated logs. They deliberately destroyed their advanced shipyards, dismantled their faster-than-light communication networks, and abandoned most of their colonies. They wanted to reset their civilization to a more sustainable level of development. The final log entry, recorded by the ship's captain over 900 years ago, was particularly chilling. "We have become too powerful too quickly. The universe is not ready for what we have learned how to do. Perhaps it never will be. We are returning to Earth to shut down the Millennium Project permanently. Let future generations develop more slowly, more wisely. May they never repeat our mistakes." The boarding party stood in stunned silence as they absorbed this information. They had discovered the derelict vessel of what might have been the most advanced civilization in galactic history, a species that had voluntarily given up technology that the Council could barely understand, let alone replicate. "Commander," said Trilok quietly, "if these records are accurate, then humans still exist somewhere in the galaxy. They didn't go extinct. They just went backward technologically." "But where?" asked Kalen. "And how far backward did they go? Are they still spacefaring? Are they even aware of their own history?" Before Commander Zefix could answer, his communicator crackled with an urgent message from the Stellar Wisdom. Navigator Essex's voice was tight with excitement and concern. "Commander, you need to return to the ship immediately. We've been monitoring galactic communication networks while you've been aboard the derelict. We just intercepted a Council intelligence bulletin that changes everything." "What kind of bulletin?" asked Zefix. "Sir, they've positively identified a species called humans operating in the Outer Rim territories. According to the report, they've recently achieved faster-than-light travel and are beginning to make contact with other civilizations. The Council is considering them for preliminary membership evaluation." The boarding party exchanged stunned glances. The humans were back. After 1,000 years of deliberate technological regression, they had rebuilt their civilization and were once again reaching for the stars. "There's more, Commander," continued Essex. "The initial assessment reports describe them as promising but primitive, with technology roughly equivalent to early spacefaring civilizations. The evaluation team recommends treating them as an emerging species, requiring guidance and protection." Commander Zefix looked around at the incredibly advanced technology surrounding them in the ancient human ship. The primitive species the Council was preparing to patronize and guide were the descendants of the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever seen. They just didn't know it yet. The emergency council session aboard the Stellar Wisdom was unlike any Commander Zephyx had ever convened. The senior officers sat around the conference table in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they had discovered. The primitive derelict they had mocked just hours earlier had turned out to be evidence of the most advanced civilization in galactic history. "Let me understand this correctly," said Navigator Essex, her crystalline form flickering with nervous energy. "The humans that the Council is currently evaluating as a promising primitive species are the same humans who built starships with technology we can't even understand, over 1,000 years ago?" "That appears to be correct," confirmed Science Officer Kalen, his tentacles organizing the data files they had extracted from the ancient ship. "Moreover, according to these records, they voluntarily abandoned that technology and regressed to a pre-spaceflight civilization. What we're seeing now is their second attempt at interstellar expansion." Engineer Trylock was studying the technical specifications they had downloaded, and his findings were making him increasingly uncomfortable. "Commander, I've been analyzing their faster-than-light drive technology. It's not just advanced. It's based on principles that our scientists have declared theoretically impossible. If this data is accurate, they were manipulating the fundamental structure of space-time itself." "How is that possible?" asked Tactical Officer Nareth, his scaled hide rippling with agitation. "Our best physicists have proven that direct space-time manipulation requires energy levels equivalent to stellar output. No civilization could possibly generate that much power. Unless," said Kalen slowly, "they found a way to do it that we haven't discovered yet. Or perhaps they found a way that we deliberately chose not to pursue because we considered it too dangerous." This thought sent a chill through the assembled officers. The idea that any civilization might voluntarily abandon such advanced technology suggested that they had discovered something truly terrifying about its potential consequences. Commander Zephyx activated the ship's secure communication system and established a priority channel to Council Intelligence Headquarters. What he was about to report would change everything the galactic community thought they knew about technological development and species classification. "Intelligence Command, this is Survey Fleet Commander Zephyx aboard the Stellar Wisdom. I need to speak with Director Corvash immediately. Classification, ultra-priority, need-to-know basis." The response came back within minutes, which was unprecedented for bureaucratic council communications. Director Corvash's insectoid features appeared on the screen, his compound eyes glittering with curiosity and concern. "Commander Zephyx, your request for ultra-priority communication has been approved. What have you discovered that requires such extreme classification?" Zephyx took a deep breath before beginning his report. "Director, we've discovered a derelict vessel of unknown origin drifting in the Kethvar system. Our initial assessment was that it belonged to an extinct primitive civilization. However, detailed investigation has revealed that this vessel was constructed by humans approximately 1,000 years ago, using technology that appears to be centuries ahead of our current capabilities." Director Corvash's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. "Did you say humans, Commander?" "The same species currently under evaluation for Council membership?" "Affirmative, sir. But the implications are far more serious than species identification. According to the ship's historical records, humans were operating as a major galactic civilization 1,000 years ago, with colonies throughout the galaxy and technology that we cannot begin to replicate." The director's compound eyes focused intently on Zephyx. "That's impossible, Commander. Our historical records show no evidence of any such civilization. A galactic-spanning human empire would have left traces throughout Council space." "With respect, sir, it appears they deliberately erased those traces. According to the ship's final logs, humans voluntarily abandoned their advanced technology in something they called the Great Regression. They dismantled their colonies, destroyed their shipyards, and returned to their homeworld to start over at a more primitive technological level. The silence that followed this revelation lasted for several long minutes. Finally, Director Korvash spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Commander, if what you're telling me is accurate, then we're dealing with a species that has already achieved technological supremacy once and chose to abandon it. The current humans making first contact with Council species are essentially the children of the most advanced civilization in galactic history." "Yes, sir. And according to their own records, they did so because they discovered that their rapid technological advancement posed a threat to all intelligent life in the galaxy. This information sent shockwaves through both the ship's crew and Council intelligence. If humans had voluntarily regressed from technological supremacy, what had they learned that made them fear their own capabilities? And more importantly, were they likely to discover the same things again as they rebuilt their civilization? Engineer Trylock had been continuing his analysis of the human ship's technology while the command conference proceeded. His findings were becoming more disturbing by the hour. "Commander," he interrupted the communication with Intelligence Command, "I need to report something critical. I've been studying their power generation systems, and I believe I understand why they might have chosen to abandon this technology." "Proceed, Engineer." "Their primary power sources aren't fusion or antimatter, as we initially assumed. They appear to be directly converting matter to energy using controlled singularities. Essentially, they were using artificial black holes as power sources for their starships. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Controlled singularity technology was not just advanced. It was potentially catastrophic if it malfunctioned. A single accident could destroy entire star systems. "That's not all," continued Trylock. "Their faster-than-light drives weren't just manipulating space-time. They were creating temporary artificial wormholes. According to their technical manuals, they could establish instantaneous travel corridors across thousands of light-years." Director Korvash's image on the communication screen flickered as he processed this information. "Commander, you're describing technology that could fundamentally alter the nature of galactic civilization. If humans possessed such capabilities, they would have been capable of appearing anywhere in the galaxy without warning. Which explains why they might have chosen to abandon it," said Commander Zefix grimly. "That level of power would be tempting to use aggressively and potentially destabilizing to galactic peace." Science Officer Kalin had been quietly working through the historical records, trying to correlate the human timeline with known galactic events. His discoveries were providing even more disturbing context. "Commander, I've found correlations between the human presence 1,000 years ago and several unexplained galactic events. The mysterious disappearance of the Althari Empire coincides with the end of their recorded diplomatic contact with humans. The Zelthian withdrawal from trade corresponds to a human memo about concerning political developments in their territory." "Are you suggesting the humans were involved in these civilizations' decline?" asked Director Korvash. "Not directly, sir. But it appears that wherever humans established significant contact with other species, those species either advanced rapidly or retreated from galactic affairs entirely. The humans seem to have had a profound destabilizing effect on other civilizations, possibly just through the example of their technological capabilities. This revelation painted an even more complex picture of why humans might have chosen to regress. They hadn't just feared their own power. They had recognized that their very presence in the galaxy was forcing other species to advance too quickly or retreat entirely, disrupting the natural pace of technological and social development. Commander Zefix realized that the Council was now faced with an unprecedented decision. The humans currently seeking Council membership were not the primitive species they appeared to be, but the deliberately regressed descendants of a civilization that had once possessed godlike technological abilities. "Director," he said slowly. "We need to decide how to handle this information. Do we tell the humans about their own history? Do we reveal to the Council that we're evaluating the descendants of technological gods? And most importantly, what do we do if they start rediscovering their ancestors' capabilities?" Before Director Korvash could respond, communications specialist Vorthan interrupted with an urgent message from the Council's diplomatic corps. "Commander, priority message from the Human Contact Division. The human delegation has requested an accelerated evaluation process. They're claiming they have significant technological contributions to offer the galactic community, and they want to demonstrate advanced capabilities that their initial assessments didn't reveal." The boarding party exchanged alarmed glances. Were the humans already beginning to rediscover their lost technology? Had their 1,000-year regression been shorter than planned? "What kind of advanced capabilities are they claiming?" asked Director Korvash. Vorthan consulted his communication logs. They mention revolutionary propulsion concepts, breakthrough energy generation methods, and innovative approaches to space-time mechanics. The exact details are classified pending the demonstration, but the terminology is remarkably similar to what we've found in the ancient ship's databases. The silence that followed was deafening. It appeared that the humans were not just rebuilding their civilization. They were rapidly approaching the same technological milestones that had led them to voluntarily regress 1,000 years earlier. "Commander Zefix," said Director Korvash finally, "I'm ordering an immediate classification of ultra-secret on all information related to your discovery. No one outside of the current briefing is to know about the ancient human ship or its contents. We need time to evaluate the implications before making any decisions about how to proceed." "What about the humans currently seeking Council membership, sir?" "Continue the evaluation process as normal, but monitor them closely for any signs of rapid technological advancement. If they begin demonstrating capabilities similar to what you've found on that derelict, we'll need to make some very difficult decisions about the future of galactic civilization." As the communication ended, Commander Zefix looked around at his senior staff. They had set out to investigate what they thought was a primitive derelict vessel, only to discover evidence that could fundamentally change their understanding of galactic history and human potential. "Commander," asked Engineer Trylock quietly, "what do you think will happen when the humans remember who they used to be?" It was a question that would keep the entire crew awake for many nights to come. The galaxy had spent 1,000 years developing under the assumption that rapid technological advancement was both natural and desirable. But the humans had learned something that convinced them otherwise, something so significant that they had voluntarily abandoned technological supremacy. Now those same humans were returning to the galactic stage, and there was no way to know whether they would make the same choice again, or whether, this time, they would decide that the galaxy was ready for the return of the most advanced civilization in its history. The ancient ship, Enduring Hope, continued its lonely drift through space, a silent monument to the species that had once ruled the galaxy and chosen to walk away. But its discovery had set in motion events that would determine whether that walking away had been permanent or merely a temporary pause in humanity's technological destiny. The boarding party completed their documentation of the vessel and returned to the stellar wisdom, carrying with them the secret that would either ensure galactic peace or herald the return of the most powerful civilization the universe had ever seen. Only time would tell which path the humans would choose when they remembered who they really were. The boarding shuttle, scientific inquiry, detached from the enlightened purpose. With barely a whisper, its advanced propulsion systems guiding it through the debris field toward the mysterious vessel. Commander Vexhai led the boarding party personally, accompanied by Science Officer Keltmore, Engineer Zathel, and a small security detail trained in xenoarchaeological procedures. As they approached the vessel's hull, the true scale of the ship became apparent. What had seemed large on the view screen was massive up close, a floating mountain of metal and purpose. The hull plates were indeed welded together, but as they drew closer, Keltmore noticed something that made his scientific instincts perk up. "Commander, these welds, they're not crude at all. Look at the molecular bonding patterns. This is precision work, designed to maintain structural integrity under extreme stress. Whoever built this understood metallurgy far better than our initial assessment suggested." Engineer Zathel, whose cybernetic implants allowed him to interface directly with the shuttle's scanning equipment, added his own observations. "The armor thickness varies across the hull in a calculated pattern. It's thickest where sensors indicate the most battle damage occurred. This ship was designed by beings who understood they would be shot at, and they built accordingly." The boarding party located an airlock, a massive, reinforced affair that spoke to the builder's expectation of hostile boarding attempts. Zathel's tools made short work of the ancient mechanisms, and the airlock cycled open with a grinding sound that echoed through the shuttle's hull. "Atmosphere is long gone," reported Keltmore, checking his instruments. "Internal temperature is near absolute zero. Whatever happened here, the life support systems failed completely at some point." The boarding party activated their environmental suits and stepped into the vessel. The corridor they entered was wide enough for 3 Zephyrians to walk abreast, with a ceiling high enough to accommodate even the tallest known species. But it wasn't designed for comfort. Every surface was functional, covered in pipes, cables, and access panels. Emergency lighting strips ran along the floor and ceiling, currently dark but clearly built to function even if the main power systems failed. "Practical," murmured Vexhai, running his scanner along the walls. "Everything serves a purpose. No decoration, no wasted space, just function." As they moved deeper into the ship, the boarding party began to appreciate the scope of what they were exploring. This wasn't just a warship, it was a mobile fortress. Blast doors every 50 meters, automated defensive positions, redundant systems running through protected conduits. The builders had expected this vessel to be boarded by hostile forces and had prepared accordingly. "Commander," called Engineer Zathel from ahead, "you need to see this." They found him standing before what was clearly the ship's armory. Even in the darkness, their suit lights revealed rack upon rack of weapons. Not elegant energy weapons or sophisticated projectile systems, but brutal, effective tools designed for one purpose: killing. The weapons were built to the same philosophy as the ship itself: robust, reliable, and devastating. Keltmore picked up one of the smaller weapons, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. "This is interesting." "It's a chemical projectile weapon, but the engineering is sophisticated. Multiple firing modes, extensive cooling systems, modular design for field maintenance. These beings expected to fight for extended periods without resupply." "Look at the ammunition," added Zathel, examining containers of metal slugs. "Various types: armor-piercing, explosive, some kind of incendiary compound. And the quantities, Commander, there's enough ammunition here to supply a small army for months of continuous combat." As they continued their exploration, the boarding party began to piece together a picture of the vessel's original crew. The living quarters were Spartan but comfortable, designed for beings roughly the size of Zephyrians, but with different proportions. The medical bay contained equipment they didn't recognize, but its purpose was clear: treating severe combat injuries under battlefield conditions. "Sir," reported Security Officer Hendricks, who had been examining the ship's bridge, "you should see the command center." The bridge was a masterpiece of military engineering. Multiple command stations, each with manual backups and independent power systems. Tactical displays that could show battlefield information from dozens of different perspectives. Communications equipment designed to punch through jamming and interference that would cripple more sophisticated systems. But it was the captain's chair that truly caught their attention. Built for function rather than comfort, surrounded by controls and displays, It was positioned to give the ship's commander a perfect view of everything happening both inside and outside the vessel. Scratches on the armrests suggested years of use, and stains on the metal spoke to the stress of command during desperate battles. "Keltmore," said Vex-High quietly, "run a detailed analysis of the command systems. I want to know everything about whoever built this ship." As the science officer began his work, the rest of the boarding party continued their exploration. What they found continued to contradict their initial assumptions. The ship's computers, while primitive by galactic standards, were marvels of reliability and redundancy. The power systems could run on almost any available fuel source. The life support systems were built to function in damaged compartments under hostile conditions for extended periods. "Commander," reported Keltmore after several hours of analysis, "I've managed to access some of the ship's data systems. The information is fragmentary, but I'm beginning to understand more about this vessel's origin." Vex-High and the others gathered around the science officer as he displayed his findings on a portable holographic projector. The ship's designation appears to be Indomitable Will, and according to internal records, it was constructed in what they call Stardate 2387 by something called the United Earth Defense Force. "Earth?" questioned Zathul. "I've never heard of that world." "Neither have I," admitted Keltmore. "But the records indicate it's the homeworld of a species that calls itself humanity, or humans. The ship was apparently part of a fleet engaged in what they termed First Contact Defense Operations." A chill ran through the boarding party as they processed this information. First Contact Defense Operations. That implied they had been fighting someone when they first encountered them. "What kind of defensive operations?" asked Vex-High, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. Keltmore manipulated the holographic display, bringing up additional data. "The records are fragmented, but they reference multiple engagements against what they call hostile alien forces. Apparently, this species' first contact with extraterrestrial life was not peaceful." "That's impossible," protested Engineer Zathul. "The Third Galactic Renaissance was a time of peace. All species achieved interstellar flight during periods of prosperity and exploration. There were no hostile first contacts." "According to these records," continued Keltmore, his voice growing tense, "the humans encountered a species they call the Devourers approximately 50 years after achieving faster-than-light travel. The Devourers apparently viewed humanity as nothing more than a food source and launched immediate attacks against human colonies." The implications hit the boarding party like a physical blow. If these records were accurate, it meant that during the galaxy's most peaceful era, an unknown species had been fighting for its survival against an enemy so hostile that no record of them existed in galactic databases. "Show us more," ordered Vex-High, his scientific curiosity warring with a growing sense of dread. The holographic display shifted to show tactical information, battle reports, casualty figures, strategic assessments. The humans had been massively outgunned and outclassed technologically, but they had fought anyway. Ship after ship had been lost, colonies had been evacuated or destroyed, and yet they had continued building vessels like the Indomitable Will and sending them into battle. "Commander," said Keltmore, his voice barely above a whisper, "according to these records, humanity was fighting a defensive war against a technologically superior enemy for over 200 years. They lost hundreds of ships, millions of lives, entire star systems, but they never surrendered." "What happened to them?" asked Security Officer Hendix. "The humans, I mean." "And these Devourers?" Keltmore worked to access more recent records, but much of the data was corrupted or missing. The last clear entries are from approximately 1,000 years ago. There are references to a final push and something called Operation Broken Chain, but the details are incomplete. Engineer Zathul had been quietly scanning the ship's systems, while the others examined the historical records. Now he looked up with an expression of scientific bewilderment. "Commander, I think I understand why this ship seemed so crude to us initially. It's not because the builders lacked sophistication. It's because they had different priorities." "Explain," ordered Vexhai. "Every system on this ship is designed for one thing: continued operation under catastrophic damage. The redundant power systems, the manual backups, the thick armor, the welded hull plates, it's all designed to keep fighting even when most of the ship is destroyed. Our modern vessels are marvels of efficiency and elegant design, but they're fragile compared to this." "You're saying this ship was built by beings who expected to be outgunned and outnumbered," said Vexhai, understanding dawning in his voice. "Exactly. They couldn't match their enemies in technology, so they built ships that could absorb tremendous punishment and keep fighting. Look at these battle damage reports. The indomitable will survived engagements that should have destroyed it a dozen times over." As the boarding party continued their investigation, they began to understand that they weren't just looking at an ancient warship. They were looking at evidence of a species that had faced extinction and refused to accept it. Every design choice, every system, every weapon had been built by beings who knew they might lose, but had decided to make their enemies pay dearly for every victory. "Commander," said Keltmore, who had been working to piece together more of the ship's records, "I've found something else. Technical specifications for other human vessels. Sir, the Indomitable Will wasn't their most powerful ship. It was apparently a medium cruiser. They built things much larger." The holographic display showed wireframe schematics of massive vessels, some several kilometers long, armed with weapons that dwarfed anything in the current galactic arsenal. Ships designed not for exploration or trade, but for one purpose: war. "How many ships did they build?" asked Vexhai, though he was beginning to fear the answer. "Thousands," replied Keltmore. "Maybe tens of thousands. This debris field, I don't think it's the site of a single battle. I think it's where their entire fleet came to die." The boarding party stood in silence, contemplating the implications of their discovery. A species that had fought against impossible odds for centuries, that had built ships designed to absorb punishment that would destroy any modern vessel, that had apparently made some kind of final stand in this remote corner of space. "Sir," said Engineer Zathel quietly, "if humanity built ships like this 1,000 years ago, and if they've had all this time to develop their technology further—" He didn't need to finish the thought. Every member of the boarding party was beginning to understand that their mocking dismissal of the crude vessel might have been premature. If the humans had survived their ancient war, if they had continued to develop their military technology with the same ruthless efficiency they had demonstrated in the Indomitable Will, then the galaxy might be about to encounter something unprecedented. They had stumbled upon evidence of a species that had learned to fight and survive against impossible odds. And somewhere in the depths of space, that species might still be out there, building ships and preparing for whatever came next. The revelation came not through the ship's ancient computers, but through Engineer Zathel's methodical analysis of the Indomitable Will's construction techniques. As the boarding party prepared to return to their ship, he made one final scan of the vessel's hull composition and discovered something that changed everything. "Commander," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled excitement, "you need to see this immediately." Vexhai and the others gathered around the engineer as he displayed his findings on the portable holographic projector. "I've been analyzing the metallurgical signatures in the hull plating, trying to determine the exact age and composition of the vessel, but I found something unexpected." The hologram showed a detailed molecular analysis of the ship's hull. "The base metals are indeed approximately 1,000 years old, as we initially determined. But there are trace elements, isotopic signatures, that shouldn't exist in naturally occurring materials. These elements were artificially created in controlled fusion reactions." "What does that mean?" asked Security Officer Hendricks. "It means," said Zathel slowly, that the humans didn't just mine these materials from their homeworld. They manufactured them using advanced nuclear engineering techniques that we've only seen in the most sophisticated galactic civilizations. Science Officer Keltmore's compound eyes widened as the implications hit him. You're saying they had advanced nuclear technology 1,000 years ago? More than that, replied Zathol. I'm saying they had nuclear technology that was more advanced than what most current galactic species possess. These isotopic signatures suggest they were manipulating matter at the subatomic level with precision that shouldn't have been possible for a species still building ships out of metal plates. Commander Vexhai felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. Continue your analysis. I want to know everything about the technology that built this ship. As Zathel worked, Keltimore made his own disturbing discovery. Commander, I've been trying to decode more of the ship's historical records, and I've found references to something called the Sol System Defense Grid. The fragmentary records suggest it was a network of automated defense stations around the human homeworld. Automated defenses aren't unusual, observed Vexhai. Most civilizations build orbital defense platforms. Sir, according to these records, the Sol System Defense Grid consisted of over 10,000 individual stations, each one armed with weapons capable of destroying capital ships. And that was just the fixed defenses. That doesn't include the mobile fleet elements. The boarding party exchanged glances. 10,000 defense stations represented a military infrastructure that dwarfed anything currently known in the galaxy. The largest defense grids maintained by the Galactic Council protected systems with fewer than 100 stations. There's more, continued Keltmore. The records reference something called the Terraforming Initiative. Apparently, the humans weren't content to simply defend their existing worlds. They were actively creating new ones, transforming entire planets to suit their needs. Terraforming is a known technology, said Vexhai, though his voice betrayed his growing unease. Not like this, sir. According to these records, they were transforming worlds in decades rather than centuries. Some kind of accelerated atmospheric processing that we don't understand. They were turning dead rocks into garden worlds faster than most species can build cities. Engineer Zathel looked up from his analysis, his cybernetic implants flickering with data streams. Commander, I've found something else. The Indomitable Will contains technology that we missed in our initial scans. Hidden in the hull structure are what appear to be microscopic manufacturing systems, molecular assemblers designed to repair damage and maintain the ship's systems indefinitely. Self-repairing ships? Questioned Hendricks. Self-improving ships, corrected Zathel. These assemblers don't just repair damage. They upgrade systems based on combat experience. This vessel was designed to become more effective the longer it fought. Every battle would have made it stronger. The full implications of their discovery were beginning to crystallize, and none of the boarding party liked what they were seeing. A species that had possessed advanced nuclear engineering, automated manufacturing, rapid terraforming, and self-improving military technology, all 1,000 years ago, during what the galaxy remembered as a peaceful era. Sir, said Keltmore quietly, I need to show you something else. I've been analyzing the star charts in the ship's navigation systems. The humans mapped significantly more territory than their official first contact date would suggest. The holographic display shifted to show a three-dimensional star chart covering hundreds of light years. Human exploration routes snaked through space, touching dozens of star systems, many of which were currently inhabited by species that had supposedly achieved interstellar flight centuries after humanity. According to these charts, continued Keltmore, the humans had explored most of this sector of the galaxy before they encountered the Devourers. They knew about our worlds, our species, our civilizations, but they never made contact. Why not? Asked Vexhai, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Because they were watching, replied Keltmore. The records reference something called the Silent Protocol. The humans had discovered that the galaxy was full of intelligent life, but they chose to remain hidden while they studied us. Engineer Zathel's next discovery drove home the truly staggering implications of humanity's technological capabilities. "Commander, I've found manufacturing specifications in the ship's computers. The humans weren't just building these vessels one at a time. They had fully automated shipyards capable of constructing fleets without any direct supervision." "Automated shipyards?" repeated Vexhai. "Sir, according to these specifications, a single human automated shipyard could construct a vessel like the Indomitable Will in less than 6 months, working continuously. And they built dozens of these yards throughout their space." The boarding party stood in stunned silence as they contemplated what this meant. A civilization capable of rapidly constructing fleets of self-improving warships, defended by massive automated grids, expanding through rapid terraforming, all while remaining hidden from the rest of the galaxy. "Commander," said Security Officer Hendricks, voicing what they were all beginning to think. "If the humans had this level of technology 1,000 years ago, and if they survived their war with the Devourers, what do they have now?" Before Vexhai could respond, Science Officer Keltmore made one final, terrifying discovery. "Sir, I found the conclusion of the ship's records. The final entry, logged just before the Indomitable Will, was abandoned." The holographic display showed a single line of text, translated from the human language. "Operation Broken Chain successful. Devourer homeworld eliminated. Fleet proceeding to rendezvous coordinates for Phase 2 operations. Long live humanity." "Phase 2 operations?" whispered Engineer Zath-Ul. Keltmore manipulated the display, showing the last star chart logged by the ship's navigation systems. "The rendezvous coordinates are in the galactic rim territories far beyond current explored space. If the humans successfully eliminated the Devourers and then withdrew to the rim—" "They've had 1,000 years to build," finished Vexhai. 1,000 years to develop their technology in secret, with all the experience and knowledge gained from their war." The implications were staggering. While the known galaxy had enjoyed a millennium of peace and prosperity, focused on art, philosophy, and cultural advancement, humanity had potentially been preparing for something else entirely. They had started with technology that was already centuries ahead of its time, had been tempered by generations of total war, and had been given 1,000 years of uninterrupted development time in secret. "Sir," said Keltmore, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's one more thing. The ship's long-range sensors recorded something just before it was abandoned. Multiple massive signatures leaving the battlefield, heading toward the galactic rim. According to these readings, the objects were several kilometers long and moving at velocities that shouldn't have been possible with known propulsion technology." "The human fleet," said Vexhai. "They didn't die here. They won their war and left." As the boarding party prepared to leave the Indomitable Will, they each understood that their discovery would fundamentally alter galactic civilization. They had found evidence of a species that had been underestimated, had survived impossible odds, and had disappeared into the unknown with technology that was already centuries ahead of anything else in the galaxy. The trip back to the enlightened purpose was made in contemplative silence. Each member of the boarding party was lost in thought, trying to process what they had learned. The crude, primitive vessel they had initially mocked represented something far more significant than they had imagined. It was evidence of humanity's first steps into the galaxy, steps taken during a time when they were fighting for survival against an enemy that had tried to exterminate them. But more than that, it was proof that humanity was still out there, somewhere in the vast reaches of space, building and preparing and growing stronger with each passing year. When they finally returned to their ship, Commander Vexhai immediately called a meeting of his senior staff. As the crew of the Enlightened Purpose listened to their report, The same progression of emotions that had affected the boarding party, curiosity, amusement, concern, and finally fear, swept through the entire ship. "Recommendations?" asked Vex High when the report was complete. "We need to contact the Galactic Council immediately," said Science Officer Keltmore. "This discovery has implications for every species in known space." "Agreed," replied Vex High. "But what do we tell them? That we've discovered evidence of a species that's been secretly building military technology for 1,000 years? That somewhere in the galaxy there's a civilization that learned to fight against impossible odds and has been preparing for something we can't even imagine?" "We tell them the truth," said Communications Officer Neld, "that the galaxy may be about to change, whether we're ready for it or not." As the Enlightened Purpose prepared to transmit its report to the Galactic Council, the crew couldn't help but wonder what humanity had become during their millennium of secret development. They had started as a species fighting for survival, with crude but effective technology. What were they now, after 1,000 years of technological advancement, driven by the hard-learned lessons of total war? The answer to that question was something the galaxy would discover soon enough. For in the deepest reaches of space, beyond the knowledge of the Galactic Council and its member species, humanity had indeed been building. They had taken the brutal lessons learned from their war with the Devourers and had used them to create something unprecedented, a civilization designed not just to survive, but to ensure that no other species would ever again face the extinction that they had barely escaped. The indomitable will and its sister ships had been humanity's first steps into the galaxy, but they were not humanity's last. And when they finally chose to reveal themselves to the galaxy at large, the crude, battle-scarred vessel that the crew of the Enlightened Purpose had discovered would be remembered not as a relic of primitive technology, but as a monument to the determination that had carried humanity from the edge of extinction to something far greater. The galaxy was about to learn what humanity had become, and nothing would ever be the same.